Thanks for coming out to the Mob Museum. We appreciate your support. I'm Zach Jensen, content developer for the museum. I applaud you all for coming out and braving the 110-degree heat. So we're rewarding you with a nice air-conditioned courtroom, plus what's going to be a fascinating topic tonight. So tonight, we are going to take a little trip to Japan. We're going to take a look inside the world of the Yakuza, Japan's organized crime syndicates. The Yakuza is a very interesting topic and one that we mention here in the museum in our Organized Crime Today exhibit on the first floor. But for the next hour, we're going to take a deeper dive into this world, and even then, we're only going to scratch the surface. So I'm honored to do that tonight with Jake Adelstein. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Thank you very much for coming here in what is 40 degrees Celsius, because I've been in Japan so long, I don't know what Fahrenheit is anymore. Thank you, it's a delight. I feel like a whale. It's great to be here. I see that there's actually one gentleman in a necktie here. That's nice. I came in Yakuza on vacation look here, with my little Hawaiian shirt and the koi on there. It's great to be here. I've come to Las Vegas many times. It's usually for a conference on transcontinental organized crime and terrorism. Sometimes I say hello to Oscar Goodman, the former mayor, former mafia lawyer, good friend of my uncle. Well, we won't mention my uncle's name.
We know Oscar.
Yeah, we know Oscar.
So Jake is an investigative journalist, and he specializes in organized crime and corruption in Japan. And in 1993, he began working as a crime reporter for the largest newspaper in Japan, the Yomiuri Shimbun. And there he gained the trust of both police detectives and members of the Yakuza as sources for his reporting. But he also made some enemies along the way, too. After 12 years at the paper, he left and published an expose on a Yakuza boss, Tadamasa Goto. And Goto was receiving a liver transplant at UCLA with a little bit of help from the FBI to get there. And so we'll definitely talk a lot more about that later on. But Goto responded to Jake's report by putting a contract out on his life. But beyond the newspaper, Jake also has worked with the State Department back in 2006 on an investigation into human trafficking in Japan. And he's also written about his experiences in his book, Tokyo Vice, as well as Tokyo Noir, a follow-up that just came out last year. And after the program tonight, there will be a book signing with Jake, and Tokyo Noir will be available for purchase, and that will be just right over there.
Thank you. I will sign anything, so postcards, slips of paper, any old copies of my book. I won't sign other people's books, but other than that.
And you might also be familiar with Tokyo Vice, as in 2022, it became a TV show on HBO. And it starred Ansel Elgort as Jake. Probably pretty flattered about that.
I think Ansel is flattered that he got to play me, yes.
Oh, yeah. And Jake also served as an executive producer on that production, the Yakuza. It's different from what we see in most of the museum, but at the same time, the themes are very similar.
I mean, I am not a great student of other mafias, but there definitely is some similarities in the love of violence, the sense of brotherhood that these guys have. The Koyama-san, who's now a nurse, he's very good at explaining the psychology of the thing. He has a tremendous insight into himself and that world, better than most people. In Tokyo Noir, there's a subchapter called The Business of Violence, and he explains exactly someone asked me to, kidnap this Buddhist priest who ripped him off, and, of course I beat them up, and at a certain point, I contacted them how much more badly do you want me to beat this person up? Would you like me to let them go? And he's calculating, I'm getting paid this amount of money. If I get arrested, how much time will I spend in jail? If I divide the time I spend in jail by this money, is it worth doing? What is the risk? What is the cost-benefit analysis? And he was very, very frank in saying, what we are selling is violence. Violence is a means of doing things. Of course, we have other businesses, but that's primarily, our business and how we survive. And makes him kind of a fascinating person because he's so honest about it. Most of these guys are full bullshit, but at least these two guys, Takigaki-san and Koyama-san, very straightforward.
Now, before we get further, I do want to ask, so you're from rural Missouri. How did you end up becoming a reporter in Japan?
Well, I went to University of Missouri, which has a great journalism school, which I never went to. This was pointed out in the local paper, which did a review of the book, and it said, Jake Adelstein, while being a resident of Columbia, Missouri, never went to the journalism school here, because if he had, he wouldn't have slept with sources, threatened people for information, and stole documents out of the garbage, all things that we learned to do as respectable journalists. But anyway, I did go to the University of Missouri. I was an exchange student, had a chance to study in Japan, and I was there a year, and through a strange series of events, I ended up living in this lovely little Zen Buddhist temple, where they charged me almost no rent as long as I helped out with funerals and stuff, and kept my hair short, which is still pretty much the same length. And I decided, I'm going to stay in Japan. It's very interesting. And newspapers in Japan hire people by having them take a standardized test. So all the major newspapers, the Asahi, the Mainichi, the Yomiuri, you take a test, and if your scores are good enough, you go to the second round of interviews, and then if you're lucky, you get hired. I had a job lined up at Sony, and I had a year of school left, and I had been writing for the school newspaper in Japanese, mostly just to improve my Japanese, much to the chagrin of my editor, Inukai, who had to edit my articles in my bad Japanese. It got better. So I had a year of school, and I was like, okay, like all my buddies in the newspaper are studying for these examinations, so I'll study as well. And to my surprise, and also a certain amount of luck, I took the examination for this one newspaper, and you're given an essay to write, because it's kind of different from the SAT, I think, because you actually have to write. There's a writing portion, and there's a translation portion, which I did really good on both of those. But the essay topic was gaikokujin, like foreigners, and I had an essay in my head, and I remembered, I'd written the essay, and I remembered like the corrected version. I have a semi-photographic memory. So I just wrote down again like the right version of the essay that had already been corrected, and that was enough to get me to the interviews, and then they hired me. And then I was like, well, Sony, sayonara. Like, thank you for the job offer, but this is more interesting.
So then from there, how do you end up reporting on organized crime?
Well, I think if you watch the TV series, and a lot of people have this mistaken impression that I was like fascinated by the Yakuza, that I was like, I'll show you. Like, this is a Yakuza fan magazine. I have 30 years of these now. This went out of print in 2017. The police sort of forced it out of print. But in Japan, the Yakuza are so established that they have these monthly fan magazines that are really thick. So they're kind of out in the open. But, you start on the police beat. All the reporters start on the police beat. And I think there were 65 of us hired in the year that I was at the newspaper. And I got sent to Saitama, which is kind of the New Jersey of Japan. I no offense to people from Jersey. Julianne, I know that Jersey is a lovely place. I'm just trying to put it in terms that people can understand. Anyway, so not only did Saitama have a lot of organized crime, but the very first big story I did was this crazy story about a serial breeder, about a dog breeder and his wife who were serial killers. And one of their victims was this Yakuza boss who was blackmailing him. And my job, amongst my other jobs at the newspaper, was to try and track down what had happened to this Yakuza boss, how he'd been killed, what his connection was to the dog breeder. And through there, I ended up befriending a organized crime cop who was kind of an outsider because he'd been sent from the organized crime task force to the homicide squad to work on this case. And like the homicide cops and the Yakuza cops don't get along. I mean, actually, you'd be amazed at how the various factions of the cops don't get along. Just like everybody hates the FBI. I don't know why that is, but all other federal agencies, like the NCIS, the OSI, they hate the FBI. And within the Tokyo police force, it's like you got Yakuza cops, homicide cops, white-collar cops. Generally, they don't work well together. Anyway, I covered that story. I did pretty good on the job. And then my second year on the job, my boss came to me, Yamamoto-san, and he said, hey, Adelstein, we're going to put you covering the not the Tokyo police, but the Saitama police headquarters. So that's the big leagues. And I'm going to assign you to Organized Crime Control Division 1 and 2 and theft. And I was like, I want to do like homicide. And he's like, well, the homicide cops don't like you. and I was like, what about white collar crimes? And he's like, you can't add 2 and 2. So financial crimes off the record. And he said, but the Yakuza, here's the great thing. He says, you may not know this, but 30% of the Yakuza are Korean Japanese. They are people who were brought over as slave labor, discriminated against, and ended up in organized crime. There's a lot of foreigners there's a lot of gaijin in the Yakuza. You're a gaijin, so it's perfect. and that's how I got assigned to cover the organized crime task force. And so I went to Sekiguchi-san, who was the detective I'd made friends with, and I said, hey, looks like I'm going to be doing this all the time. And he's like, well, if you're going to be doing this all the time, the first things you need to do is to know who's who. And so he took me to like a 7-Eleven, and he bought me one of these magazines. He's like, you need to buy this every month and read it. Like, the names and faces are in there. And then he gave me like a 500-page book called Byori Shudan no Kozo, the structure pathological groups, which was a study in the 1960s of Yakuza. And it's like 600 pages of academic research and photos and stuff, but that was actually very useful. And that was my introduction to the Yakuza. I did well on my first year. I'm a foreigner. There's a lot of foreigners in the Yakuza. And my boss was like, this is a job for you.
And early on, you had an opportunity to work with a Yakuza boss. Tell us about that.
So there's many different Yakuza groups. There's the Yamaguchi-gumi, which has been around since 1915, over 100 years. And there's the Sumiyoshi-kai and there's the Inagawa-kai, and they all have turf and territory. And Saitama was Sumiyoshi-kai, was very powerful in Saitama. And the red light district was Minami Ginza. And an underboss in the Sumiyoshi-kai called the newspaper and said, I need to speak to Jake Adelstein. And he identified himself, like, this is Kaneko Naoya of the Sumiyoshi-kai. So my colleague, like Yoshihara-kun, called me up. He's like, hey, Jake, like, someone from the Sumiyoshi-kai wants to talk to you. Are you in trouble? And I was like, I could be, I don't know. So I called, I called one of my better sources, the detective, and I was like, hey, Kaneko Naoya from the Sumiyoshi-kai wants to speak to me. Should I take this meeting? Like, you're going to tell me no, right? And he's like, oh, Kaneko, he's like a great guy. Like, we arrested him last year because he set up this fake political group, and he came in, he confessed, he did the crime, he did his time. Like, it's a Yakuza go, outstanding guy. You should take the meeting. I'm like, all right. So, I went, so I called up the office, and I was like, excuse me, Mr. Naoya, Mr. Kaneko, all right, can you tell me where your office is? He's like, just ask. Everybody knows where the office is. And I would have preferred to have an address, but I was like, okay. So I went to Minami Ginza. I went out and I spoke to one of like the touts in front of like some nurse-themed sex club. And I said, hey, I'm looking for Kaneko Naoya's office. And they're like, Naoya-san, would you like to come in? And I was like, no, I just need to go to the office. And so, 2 or 3 people directed me to his office, and it was set up as a construction company / real estate company. It didn't have the group logo on it, because in the old days, probably if it had been 1992, they would have had the Sumiyoshi-kai logo on the front door. So he went in, and I sat in his office, which is very nice. He offered me a cup of tea, and I said, no, thank you. And he was immediately pissed off, and I was like, wow, what did I do? And he's like, why don't you want my tea? And I'm like, I'm not really a big tea drinker. And I said, and the other thing is, I lived in a Zen temple for a long time, so, we always had tea after Zazen, so as soon as I drink green tea, my knees hurt, so I'm really, have this Pavlovian dislike for tea. And he was like, okay, what would you like? I like a coffee. So he sends out, like, get him a coffee. And so I'm like, I'm wondering what I can do for you or why I am here. And he said, well, actually, I called you here because it is about tea. And he says, I have this real problem, is that when the Saitama police come to my office now, I do what I do to you. I offer them tea and sweets. They have like some Japanese sweets there. And they refuse to drink it. And they refuse to eat it. They make a big show of it. And I'm like, and first of all, for me, right, I'm like, this is mind-baffling me that the cops make a casual visit to the office. Because you just sort of see them as adversaries, right? And I didn't realize that there's this kind of like give and take relationship where they're meeting on a regular basis. Because I'm very new to this. And so I asked for that explanation. He sort of lays it out for me. And I'm like, okay, what is the problem with the cops being standoffish? And he says, the problem is that my men are interpreting that as the fact that I am a stool pigeon for the cops. And actually, in Japanese, you don't say stool pigeon, you say dog. Like someone who's an informant is a dog. And they're making a show of not accepting my stuff makes me look like I am actually an informant and I'm giving them more information than I should. And it puts me in the grave danger of my own men killing me. And I was like, wow, that's a tough problem for you. And I said, what would you like me to do? And he said, I would like you to tell me why the Saitama police are being so standoffish. And I'm sitting there and I said, no offense, but I'm not in the business of doing favors for Yakuza. But there is one person I can ask. And if he says, okay, to give you that information and he can get me that information, then I'll give it to you. I can't make any promises. And he said, that would be great. So, I called up Sekiguchi-san, I explained the situation. He said, come on down like two or 3 days and let's talk about it. So I went to his house, he had like these two kids, just like in the TV series, so the kids are, doing their homework and, and he says, here's the deal. The number 2 in the organization is spreading rumors that Kaneko is bribing police. And now that these rumors are circulating that the police are, being bribed by Kaneko, no one wants to take his tea or even have a sweets from him because it looks like they might be taking bribes. And I'm like, well, why would the number 2 spread rumors that Kaneko is bribing the cops? He said, because the number 2 wants to sell methamphetamines in the area, and Kaneko is opposed to it. So he wants to get rid of Kaneko, and he's trying to make Kaneko look like he's a stool pigeon for the police, hoping that the other guys kill him, and that he's rid of the problem, and they can get into the drug trade. And I'm like, is it okay to give that information to Kaneko? And he says, yes, I want you to go tell him what's happening, that's the deal. Because he's a good guy. And we don't need drugs in Saitama, and of the number 2 and the number 3, the number 2 is an asshole and Kaneko's okay. And I'm like, okay. So I went to his office, back to his office, I explained what was happening, he immediately got it, and he said, thank you very much. And that was the beginning of our weird relationship, because he offered me many things, to express his thanks. We're all adults here. He was basically, would you like pussy? And I was like, no. And he was like, guys? And I'm like, no. And I'm like, and don't offer me money either. And I was like, if you really feel, grateful, I would like information, because that is, my business. I don't expect you to give me information on your own organization, but if you know some Yakuza group that's doing something really crooked, or investigations in progress, or anything that would give me an edge as a reporter, that would be nice to have. And he said, that I can do for you. And he said, in a way, you and I are in the same business. You make your name and your reputation by finding out things that people don't want to be known and writing about it for the public interest. And I find out things that people don't want to be known, and I make money by making sure you don't do your job. And there was some truth to that. Yeah. So that was the beginning of a very good relationship. A couple months later, I realized that the number 2 had vanished, and I asked Sekiguchi-san, what happened? And he says, what do you think happened? I don't think deeply about that.
So, as a reporter, sometimes you might make enemies along the way. But in your case, you made a particular enemy with a nasty Yakuza boss, Tadamasa Goto, which we referenced earlier. Can you tell us a little bit about how that happened?
So, most Yakuza are sociopaths, but Goto Tadamasa, a particularly smart Yakuza, is one of the worst because he's attacked film directors, very powerful politically. At one time, he was the largest shareholder of Japan Airlines, which should tell you how powerful this guy was. Kind of like a homicidal Richard Branson. And while I was working on a case, actually, there was a Yakuza boss, Kajiyama Susumu, who was laundering money in Las Vegas at the MGM Grand and Caesar's Palace. Sorry, guys, I'm dropping names there, but it's all been in print. And as I was working on that story, I asked someone, how did Kajiyama Susumu know how to launder money in Las Vegas? And Goto Tadamasa told him. After he got his liver transplant, he hasn't gone to Vegas very much, but before that he went to Vegas all the time. And I was like, liver transplant? How does a Yakuza boss get a liver transplant in the United States? And they're like, well, that's a mystery, isn't it? So I stayed on that story for years and years. And then I was working on this story about human trafficking for the State Department. The State Department was the sponsor of the study. And it turned out that, of course, Goto was heavily involved in human trafficking because he has no moral center. And it's a moneymaker. And around the time that I was working on that, someone in the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department was using a shared filing system, kind of like Napster, called Winnie. And in order to download some really bad porn, you have to designate an upload file. So he uploaded the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department organized crime database, like half of it.
Wow.
And including an entire folder of 3 gigabytes of information on Goto Gumi, including his passport numbers and his mistresses, and all his front companies. And from there, I was able to figure out when he had gone to the United States and gotten a liver transplant, and I also realized that he had made a negotiation with the FBI to be allowed to get into the United States. Now, the FBI never sat down with UCLA and said, give this guy a liver. But he knew he couldn't get into the United States under his own name. So he made a deal with the FBI to rat out his fellow buddies in exchange for a free pass to UCLA. And it turned out that there were 3 other Yakuza who got liver transplants at UCLA. The head of Miyogumi, Takeshita Saburo, who's one of Goto's henchmen, and Ogino from the Matsuba Kai. These names won't mean anything to you, but they mean something to me. And when he found out that I was going to write this story, because of a leak on the part of the publisher who was originally going to publish Tokyo Vice, he basically put a contract out at me, and the National Police Agency had me come in and said, we're putting you under police protection, and that was pretty weird. And then at the same time that I got put under police protection, one of the cops I knew from Saitama took me aside because he was the National Police Agency on assignment. And he said, hey, Adelstein, it looks like you've got yourself in a jam here. And he says, personally, we all are pissed off at the FBI for giving this guy a lease on life. Nobody clued us into this deal was made. So we're not happy about it. And he says, but, you're a writer, and what you need to do is write this story, because once the story is out, there's no reason for him to kill you. But until you get it done, there's an incentive to shut you up. And as they say in Japanese, dead men have no mouths, so get writing. And so eventually, I wrote an article about his liver transplant first for the Washington Post. And I just had dinner with the editor of that piece 3 days ago, John Pomfret. And it was such a hard piece to get into the Washington Post because everyone thought I was crazy. I mean, they were like, FBI making deal with mob boss, to get a liver transplant in the United States. But he got someone in the FBI to talk about the botched circumstances. And so article came out in the Los Angeles Times. And then during this period of chaos, while I was under police protection, I hired an ex-Yakuza to be my bodyguard and driver. So he was with me for 5 years. Sugawara Mochizuki-san is what the name he went by. I think Julianne met him many times, somewhere in the audience.
And you wrote a book about.
Yeah. And when I hired him to be my body, he'd just been kicked out of the Yakuza. He'd been kicked out of the Yakuza because he had not paid his association dues. So, you think it's hard to get kicked out of the Yakuza? It's like, no, don't pay your association dues. They'll kick you out so fast. And when he got kicked out of the Yakuza, he had nowhere to go, and he was heavily in debt. And as we were sitting around, and I was telling him my game plan, he said, "Okay, one of the conditions for me taking this job is I want you to write my biography because I am proud of being a Yakuza. I want people to know that the Yakuza are not all scum like Goto Tadamasa." And I said, "Great, I will live up to that promise." And it turned out, years later, right, like maybe 5 years down the road, when I'd sort of finished his book, which is called The Last Yakuza, I said, it's a great thing that, it worked out for you, being my bodyguard driver, and we got through it. It worked out great. And he said, well, actually, to tell you the truth, I was thinking about killing myself, but there's only, but you only get a payout after a certain number of years. And I just had a fresh life insurance policy, so I figured that you'd be killed and I'd be killed. But if I was killed, my kids would get the life insurance payment. I was like, wow, it's very samurai of you.
Wow. And so that situation with Goto,
Yeah.
How does that get resolved?
It gets resolved because really, two ways. Once that whole story was out, that he'd made a deal with the FBI to get a liver transplant in the United States by ratting out his buddies. It was only a matter of time before he got kicked out of the Yakuza himself, so he had less power. And the other one is there's this wonderful aphorism in the Yakuza, which is, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So before I wrote the article for the Washington Post, I went to the person in the organization who disliked him the most, who stood to benefit from getting his turf and territory, and I asked him for a comment. Like, did you know that this was happening? Were you okay with this? Making a deal with the FBI doesn't seem very Yakuza-like. Was everybody on board with this? And of course they weren't on board. And my sense was that, that he's a bright fellow, that our real conversation was like, I can get rid of your rival, you just have to keep me alive and keep him off my back. And pretty much that's how it's worked out.
Okay. Now, you mentioned Goto and 3 other Yakuza bosses needed liver transplants. Why so many liver ailments?
Okay, there's 3 reasons. One is that methamphetamines were usually injected, and a lot of Yakuza use them early in their life, because liquid courage. Japan was one of the first countries in the world to synthesize meth, which was sold over the counter until the 1950s under the name Hiropon. It was also given to the kamikaze and all the soldiers as a ration. So if you want to know what happens if you give make an army of meth heads, terrible things. And the Yakuza were very much into meth. So using needles, a lot of them get hepatitis C, which damages your liver. The tattoos themselves have ink that is carcinogenic. It's bad for your liver. And the other thing is, if you do it the traditional way where you dig into the skin and use kind of charcoal to put it in, it kills the skin, so you've got like a 3rd-degree burn. And so you can't sweat. So it puts tremendous pressure on the liver. So between smoking and drinking and having these tattoos that interfere with your body's ability to get rid of toxins, you are a great candidate for liver problems. So that is a very common one for them. Okay. And as a matter of fact, if you're sitting around with old Yakuza, the average age of a Yakuza now is 55, and I am 56, because no young people are joining. So the people that I know now, and some of them I'm quasi-friends with, when we get together, it's all like, maybe there's talk about the glory old days or, certain cases or gang wars, but a lot of it's like, how's your liver, dude?
They're also showing off their pinkies as well?
Oh, no. I think, there is one guy who passed away named Kani-san, because he had screwed up so many times that he basically only had these fingers. So Kani-san is like Mr. Crab, but that's an extreme case.
Yeah. Now you mentioned that not many young people are joining the Yakuza. So with the Yakuza in decline, what does organized crime look like in Japan today?
So organized crime in Japan looks very disorganized. So you have like ex-Yakuza and young people, and they're basically doing fraud, like phishing, phone, and variations of the phone fraud. I just spoke with someone about 2 months ago so there's all these phone frauds in which like someone calls and pretends to be your daughter or your grandson, and they need money desperately, and you need you to pick up the money, or someone calls from pretending they're from your bank, and they have some personal information about you, because of course you have to be swayed to convince this is true. Like, your bank card has been compromised. Someone from the bank is going to come by and bring you a new bank card. They take your bank card, and they, give you the new bank card, but then they take all your money out of your account. There's all these various identity crimes where they get people to cough up their money. And the most recent variation is someone, and the public is starting getting wise, so the most recent variation is someone calls up pretending to be a police officer, telling you that your card has been found used by a bunch of crypto criminals, and they need you to come into the police station immediately so they can question you. They ask you to pack for the night. And then after many, many calls, they seem to be convinced that they'll let you not come into the police station, and you agree to move your money around so they can track the money, and then they take that money. So those are the crimes that these people are invested in. There's always new scams and things, but the bread and butter of the Yakuza, which was extortion, protection money, that is not a revenue source for anybody. And no one has really replaced that. The days when everyone paid protection money if you were a business or a bar and entertainment industry are gone. Though occasionally I will ask people, was it better when you were paying off the Yakuza? And they will say quite sheepishly, yes, but we had better dealings with unruly customers. It was better for business to pay them off than have to pay like private security companies.
And it's illegal to pay them off now.
It is illegal to pay them off. From 2009 to 2011, the Japanese government did something which they could have done a lot earlier, which they basically passed ordinances on a prefecture by prefecture level, which make it a crime to pay off the Yakuza. And at the same time, they started, strongly urging, this is Japanese government at its finest, strongly urging every company and every business to put an organized crime clause, exclusionary clause in their contracts, which means if you join a sports club in Japan, or you open a bank account, or you get a cell phone, there will be a clause that's in the contract that says, I am not a member of an organized crime group, nor have I ever been one, nor am I associated with a member. If you don't sign it, you can't have a bank account, you can't have a phone. But if you do sign it and you're a Yakuza, you've committed fraud, and then immediately the police will arrest you. And even if you don't get prosecuted, you're going to be in jail for 23 days. And that sucks. So that combination of making it a crime to pay off the Yakuza and having all contracts have organized crime exclusionary clauses, which are called Boryokudan Haijo Joko, has made it so unpleasant to be a Yakuza that everybody leaves. Can you imagine not having a bank account or not having a cell phone? And it's a hard way to live in this world now.
So with the Yakuza in decline, there's not as much Yakuza to report on. So I understand that you've been investigating and reporting on other things. Can you tell us about some of those?
Yeah, I have investigated the phenomenon of missing people in Japan, which is very fascinating. Every year, about 80,000 people reported missing in Japan. And, depending upon other countries, that's a large or not large number. But the reasons they go missing and how they go missing and the infrastructure of, in a society where you don't think it would be easy to vanish, were fascinating enough to turn into a podcast called The Evaporated. I think that's the only thing I've ever won an award for, Best Podcast in Asia. So I spent a year working on that, and you can listen to it wherever you listen to your podcast. The Evaporated, Gone with the Gods. Gone with the Gods refers to kamikakushi, which is this Japanese belief that the gods hide people. And the most recent thing I did had absolutely nothing to do with Japan. It's coming out as a new book called The Devil Takes Bitcoin, which is about the collapse of Japan's first Bitcoin exchange, which was the world's largest Bitcoin exchange called Mt. Gox. And it's also the tale of cybercrime and Satoshi Nakamoto, the alleged creator of Bitcoin. So that's a really fun caper book. Because it's kind of a mystery, I won't give it away, is you have to try, as you follow me as I'm, interviewing and focusing on this case of this $500 million worth of Bitcoin vanishing, and is the goofy French CEO of this company in Japan guilty or not? For like 4 years, I had no idea which way it would go. So it's a fun book. And after this, I'm continuing a podcast I did last year called Witness Night Shift, which is about a serial killer in my hometown. He worked at the VA, he or she worked at the VA hospital where my father still works. And in 1992, my father started the investigation. And that podcast is about maybe America's most prolific serial killer and why that case went sideways. So that's fun for me to be working on something that has nothing to do with Japan. So, and as for the Yakuza, I've got like 30 years of this stuff. I've got Yakuza bottles from their ceremonies. I've got, videos that they make of their succession ceremonies. I have Yakuza jackets. Like they made like sweatsuits for themselves, like jumpsuits that the lower ranking members would wear, just like in the TV series. So someday I'm going to open a Yakuza museum. Maybe close to the mob museum.
Maybe.
Find me somebody. It won't be a rival. We'll sort of be a cooperative thing. And I'm going to make it mission free. But at the very end, I'm going to have 2 ex-Yakuza asking for donations. No one will ever come back, but you'll definitely get a sense of what it's like to deal with the Yakuza.
Careful, you're giving me ideas. Well, folks, we've just barely scratched the surface. If you want to learn more about the Yakuza and Jake's experiences, right after he'll be selling his book and he'll be signing it. But let's give a round of applause for Jake for joining us. Now, before we dive into that, we have time for a few questions. So if anybody has questions, go ahead and raise your hand. We'll bring the microphone to you so everybody can hear your questions and for the video as well.
Thank you for all this. It's fabulous. To what extent was the Japanese government involved with the Yakuza?
That's a really good question. The Liberal Party of Japan, the Liberal Democratic Party of Japan, was actually founded with Yakuza money by a guy named Kodama Yoshio, who is a right-wing nationalist and war criminal, and Prime Minister Abe's grandfather, Kishi Nobusuke, who also was a war criminal who was reinstated by the Allies after the occupation, also was someone with heavy Yakuza ties. So when the ruling party of Japan, and they've been the ruling party for most of Japan's history after 1950, is founded by the Yakuza, they're going to have a lot of power and access. Much less so than they used to, but the structure of politics in Japan and the Liberal Democratic Party is like a Yakuza organization. They have badges. They refer to the members of their faction leader as the Oyabun. So there's a really heavy Yakuza mentality, even if the organized crime doesn't have the sway with them that they used to have. And for many years, the politicians in the Yakuza fraternized well, and there were times when you could say the Yakuza determined who would be the prime minister.
Hi, I just wanted to say I'm a huge fan of the Tokyo Vice show, and it's really great to see you up here. Just in your opinion, how accurate would you say the actual show is to your own real-life experiences?
I'd say the great thing about the show was the showrunner, that's like the person who's in charge of overall things, was J.T. Rogers. I went to high school with him. So, I went to Japan. He often became a very successful playwright, and is very good at historical drama. So I got to go over every single line of the script. I'd say it's about 90% accurate. There were some compromises that were made that I was kind of like, yeah, I mean, I guess it's possible that you could have a scenario where this happened, but Japan has a very unique police force and very unique rules. So to give you an example of where we had an argument over realism is, there was a scene in season 2 where the detective comes home and there's a Yakuza waiting for him, and the original script was the detective pulls a gun on the Yakuza, and you're thinking, why wouldn't that be realistic? Because Japanese cops don't get to take their guns home. They go into work, they check out their guns. When they go home, they check back in the guns. Every bullet is counted for. So, I felt the show was very realistic. It departed from the book in many places, especially the scene where the Jake character does methamphetamines, because I've never done that. But generally, it was as close as we could to being authentic, so I was pleased with it.
I've enjoyed your books very much. Okay. And in the first one, you do a great job talking about the subjugation of women into the sex trade. Second one, of course, you described. And the third one, which I discovered by chance in an all-Asian bookstore in Washington, D.C. called JF Books. And I guess the question is, how is your health? You discussed... Well, people are laughing, but if they haven't read the book, they don't know what I'm talking about. And you talk a lot about, at the beginning, you went to this Zen Buddhist thing, but at the end, you go back to this Buddhist Zen way of life here. And how is your health, is my question.
Well, thank you very much. That shows you really read the book. My health is pretty good. The health of my Zen master is not very good, which is sad. That may force me to make some decisions about what we're going to do with the temple and other things much earlier than I thought. I'm hoping he gets better. I'm in pretty good health. My sweetheart, Jessie Nakamura, is constantly on my ass about eating healthy. And so, like in the last couple months, I'm, down to my pre-COVID weight of about 79 kilos and a body fat of about 20%, which for me is pretty good. Had a stomach tumor taken out 2 years ago, so I'm having that monitored, but generally pretty good. I try and eat healthy and exercise a lot. The Zen meditation helps, and so do regular checkups. One thing about Japan, an aside, is Japan has a very good public healthcare system. It works. You get to pick your doctors. You have to pay 30% of your bill. If you get cancer, it doesn't go up. So it's nice.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. Let's give Jake a round of applause again.
Thank you very much. And this is my gift to Zach, one of his own copies of a Yakuza fanzine.
Thank you very much.